Now here's the completed paper towel dispenser we're about to make, and I'd like to point out a couple things to help you along the way with construction. There's very few components. We've got a base, some dowels on the bottom and on the undersurface of the top that act as the pivots. We have this dark wood piece here that I call an upright. We have the top and then a wing. And from there it's just a matter of kind of making the shapes that please your eye and so forth, and we'll give you some dimensions along the way to help guide you. For the upright section, I'm using wenge. Now I've got a piece here that's about 13.5 inches long, a little bit longer than what I need. And I want to rip two pieces that are 5/8 of an inch wide, and then another piece that is a little bit larger than 1/4 of an inch. And that'll create that gap for where the top piece pivots through on it. So we'll just get those pieces ripped up, and then we can glue this back together. Now what we're going to do is just glue these right back together again, like so, and we'll have that gap up in here. Now because I ripped this center piece a little bit wider than 1/4 of an inch, that will provide clearance for the top piece to swivel in there. The top piece that's going to fit between here will be exactly 1/4 of an inch. Now I need to have 2 inches from this point to this point, or thereabouts. So I'm just going to glue that back together, and then I'll trim and square up the ends after the glue's had a chance to dry. Now yes, you could of course bypass this by just using a dado cutter and cutting that slot in there using a dado cutter. However, based on the workflow that I've got to kind of work with today, this is just going to be a little bit more efficient for me. Make sure that you get your face grains lined up again properly, the way you had it originally, and then that way the glue line will disappear pretty nicely. Now the top and bottom is going to be made out of a piece of maple. This one's got some figure in it. I had to plane it down to a little bit more than 11/16 of an inch thick. I'd like it to have been 3/4, but it was twisted and warped, so I had to clean it up. But it is 6 inches wide. So what I need to do now is just cut off the two pieces, one for the top, one for the bottom. Now the top will be 6 inches wide by 5 7/8 of an inch long. And the bottom will be 6 inches wide by 8 3/8 inches long. With the grain, I want a 1/8 inch deep by 1/4 inch wide groove to run across the top surface. So that'd be the good face. Here's my bad face. You can see the heart and the sapwood. This is my good face. So I want that down. And again, that's 1/8 inch deep and 1/4 inch wide, centered left to right. And that groove will accept that wing that we're going to put on the top. Now to make that wing that'll be at the top, I'm going to work with some 1/4 inch thick wenge, some material, some cut-offs from a project that I made earlier. But all I needed to do was, of course, check to make sure it was truly 1/4 inch thick, which in fact it was, so it fits my groove real nice. Now what we'll do is we'll start working out that shape over at the bandsaw. A little bit of layout work to get the rough shape in there. We'll get it cut to shape in a couple of areas, and then we'll refine it a little bit as we start to fit everything together. Now because my material isn't 3/4 of an inch thick, and I do kind of need to work with that thickness of the material as part of my layout, I'm going to line up my blank like so and pencil that in so I can see the shape of my stock. Now I know I can go down 1/8 of an inch to fit inside that groove, so I'll get that line penciled in as well. And I do want to be rather accurate with this because this is going to establish the bottom edge of one of my cuts. Now what we need to do is get the outside shape drawn in. At the front edge, we already have that dimension there. We want it flush the front edge of our top. And at the back end, it'll be 8 1/4 inches long. So we'll go back 8 1/4, pencil that spot in, and at that point we want it 1 7/16 high. Pencil that in, and then we'll just connect that point at the back with our top surface at the front, and I'll leave a little bit of extra material there for detailing it in. And now I have my wedge shape, or my wing rather, laid out, and we can go over to the bandsaw and cut that out. Now I'll use one of my sanding blocks to make sure that that surface is as flat as I can make it. And a quick dry fit to make sure it fits up nice back here, where we've got a nice square joint, that we're above the surface, and everything fits in good. That's pretty good for now. Now you can start to see how this is all going to come together. We're going to, of course, have our upright back here. That'll allow this to pivot and swing open. But when dispensing the paper towels, there's really nothing to keep it in place. What I've done is I've turned up some 1.5" diameter oak buttons, we'll call them. They're about 1 inch long, 1.5" in diameter. Absolutely nothing fancy. We'll attach one to the top surface of the bottom and the bottom surface of the top. That will give us the pivot point for the paper towel. As we hold it, we'll be able to pull off our paper towel and then tear off the excess. So we'll need to lay out the location for these little buttons, and then at the same time we'll do the layout for the curve or radius at the front of both the top and the bottom. I've gone through, found the center point of the width of the board, which is 3 inches in, come back from the front edge 3 inches, and then I set my compass at a 3-inch radius. And I'll just pencil that in. Using the bandsaw, I can cut away the waste, creating that 3-inch radius. Now I'll just use the belt sander to further refine that shape. Now what I'm doing is setting my table at about a 3-degree angle. And what I want to do is now start working in that bevel that's at the front of these. Now that the glue's had a chance to dry on our upright, I've run it through the planer to clean up both faces. Now the one thing I want to do is bevel this top edge where the fork is at that same angle. And that'll help carry that theme through, or that visual effect through the rest of the piece. Now a moment ago I misspoke and I said tilt the table down at 3 degrees. It's actually 5 degrees. But nonetheless, I'm going to just bevel this back a little bit so that it kind of follows that same angle. Prior to this though, I did also cut it off to length so that I've got my proper distance here, 1 5/16, and then my proper overall length. Now as I mentioned, we're going to be using these little buttons, 1.5" diameter dowels cut off to about 1 inch long, and we'll be setting those on the surfaces of the top and bottom. And that'll be our pivot point for the paper towels. So I'm going to take an 1.5" Forstner bit and bore into the material about 1/4 inch, just enough to give it some support and stability. Now the upright that's going to go near the back, like so, is going to be joined to the base with a mortise and tenon joint. Seems a bit overkill, but really in this application it's really just about the best possible joint. Now what we need to do is cut a 1/2 inch wide mortise in here. That's about 1 1/4 inches long, and then we'll cut a matching tenon on the end of our upright, fit the two together, and we'll be almost done. Now we'll be doing this mortising over at the hollow chisel mortiser, and I've already got that all set up. We're just going to use a 1/2 inch chisel and pop a couple holes in there. Now this is one of the easy ways of making a tenon. I'm using a 1/2 inch stacked dado head cutter, and I've got the distance from the rip fence to the far side of the blade set to the thickness of the stock that the tenon is going to fit into. In my case, a little bit less than 3/4 inch. Now I've raised the saw blade up 1/8 inch, taken a test cut to get the height right. Now to do this operation safely, I need to start out first by cutting away the material that would be towards the end of the upright. I'll make one pass, shift the part over against the fence, and then make the final pass. I'll take a cut on all 4 faces. And in my case, it works out where I've got to take an 1/8 inch off of all 4 faces to get a nice fitting tenon. Well, I think that's a pretty good fit. I'm not going to put it all the way in because I know I got to take it back out again. Maple has a tendency to split out on me. Now our next step is to get these two pieces drilled so that they can pivot against one another. Now for an axle, I'm going to be using 1/4-inch hardwood dowel, either maple, cherry, perhaps walnut, whatever I've got on hand. But I need one of the sections to be somewhat of a press fit so we can glue it in place, and then the other one to be the pivot. I'm going to have the hole in the top portion, the wing that's on the top, that'll be oversized by a 1/64. So I'll drill that one out to 17/64. The hole through the fork, or the upright, I'm going to drill with a 1/4-inch drill bit. Now our next step is to sand everything up as best we can get it at this point before we start the assembly. So I'll go through, finish, sand everything. Then what I'm going to do is glue the wing into the top piece, and I'll of course glue the upright into the base. We'll let those sit up a little bit, and then we'll catch up with you at that time. Now as promised, I've glued everything together and I've detail sanded all the pieces so that there aren't any sharp edges. This will be something that you'll be handling quite a bit, so make it feel good to the hand. Now I've got my buttons, or my little dowels, glued in for the pivot points. And our last step now is to get our dowel set up for our axle. Now I will point out that drilling this hole, the one that will be our pivot point, you may even want to hold off on drilling that one until this stage. It turned out, even though I was very careful with all my measurements, I goofed up and I drilled it a little bit too far this way towards the center of the axles. But it's close enough where it's not going to affect its operation and so forth. And we'll just press that in. I'll put a couple of drops of super glue there and take my flush trim saw to trim up the ends of the dowels. Well, I applied Deft for my finish. Came out looking real nice. It has a good feel to it. Next up, install your paper towels, and now you've got a nice, attractive paper towel dispenser to dress up your kitchen.